What happens when a beloved television presenter walks onto a talk show set expecting a friendly conversation, only to find himself ambushed by a host determined to tear him down? In just 40 seconds, one dismissive comment would transform a routine interview into the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history, leaving audiences shocked and producers scrambling as the guest stormed off the set. This is the story of how a simple charity appearance became a television moment that nobody would ever forget. The Loose Women's studio was buzzing with its usual energy that morning. Crew members adjusted cameras while checking light meters and sound levels, making sure every angle was perfect. The audience settled into their seats, excited for another episode of their favorite daytime show, chattering amongst themselves about what topics might come up. The panel prepared for another lively discussion, flipping through their notes and sipping water from branded mugs. Nick Knowles, the friendly face from DIYSOS and a household name across Britain, was scheduled to appear as a guest. He had been invited specifically to talk about his latest charity work, helping families in desperate need rebuild their homes and their lives. It was supposed to be a feel-good segment, the kind of heartwarming television that audiences loved. The kind that would have people reaching for tissues at the emotional stories, not gasping in shock at what they were witnessing unfold before their eyes. Nick walked onto the set with a warm smile, waving to the audience, who greeted him with enthusiastic applause. He looked relaxed, dressed casually but smartly in his trademark style, exactly the way people had come to expect from him over the years. He took his seat across from the panel, which included Denise Welch, Kay Adams, Nadia Sawalha, and Jane Moore. The lights were bright, almost too bright, but Nick was used to that. The atmosphere seemed friendly enough, with the panelists smiling at him as he settled into his chair. Nick relaxed, ready to share stories about the incredible families he had helped and the amazing volunteers who made it all possible. He had no idea what was about to unfold. No idea that in just a few minutes, everything would change. The smile on his face would disappear, replaced by anger and disbelief. The friendly atmosphere would turn toxic, and he would find himself in the middle of a confrontation that would end with him walking off the set in front of millions of viewers. "Nick, it is so lovely to have you here with us today," Kay Adams said cheerfully, opening the conversation with her characteristic warmth. "You have been doing such absolutely amazing work with DIYSOS. I think everyone watching knows the show, but for those who might not be familiar, can you tell us about some of the families you have helped recently? I know there have been some really special projects." Nick leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with genuine passion for his work. "Thank you so much for having me here. You know, the families we meet are just absolutely incredible. I mean, truly, genuinely inspiring people who are dealing with situations that most of us could not even begin to imagine. We recently worked with a family whose young son has severe disabilities. They had been living in a house that was completely unsuitable for his needs. There was no wheelchair access whatsoever, no proper bathroom facilities that could accommodate his equipment and his needs. The parents were absolutely exhausted, trying to carry him up and down stairs every single day, multiple times a day, just to get him to different rooms. They were struggling just to give their son basic dignity and basic quality of life. It was heartbreaking to witness, truly heartbreaking to see what they were going through day in and day out. "Oh my goodness, that sounds so incredibly challenging for everyone involved," Nadia said, her voice full of genuine sympathy, her hand moving to her chest. "I cannot even imagine how difficult that must be day after day." "It was heartbreaking to see. Absolutely heartbreaking," Nick continued, his voice growing more animated as he spoke about something he clearly cared deeply about. "So, but then we brought in the team, and I have to tell you, the volunteers who turn up for these builds are just phenomenal. Over 9 days, working around the clock, we completely transformed that house. We built proper ramps with the right gradients so the wheelchair could move smoothly installed a fully accessible wet room with all the equipment the boy needed, created a sensory space designed specifically for his condition. When the family came back and saw what we had done, when they walked through that door and saw their new home, the mother just broke down in tears. She could not speak for a full minute. She was just crying. And when she could finally talk, she said it was like getting her life back, like finally being able to breathe again. Those are the moments that make everything worthwhile. Those are the moments that make all the long hours and hard work mean something real. The audience clapped warmly, many of them visibly moved by the story. Jane Moore smiled and nodded approvingly, clearly touched by what she was hearing. The segment was going exactly as planned, exactly as everyone had expected it would go. But then Denise Welch, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the panel, shifted in her seat. There was something in her expression, a tightness around her mouth, a certain look in her eyes that suggested she had other ideas about where this conversation should go. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and it was about to come out. "Nick, can I ask you something?" Denise interrupted suddenly, her voice cutting through the positive atmosphere like a knife through butter, instantly changing the energy in the room. Nick turned to her, still smiling, still in that warm mode he had been in throughout the conversation so far. "Of course, Denise. Go ahead. All this charity work, all these families you help, it is very nice, very heartwarming. Everyone loves a good cry over a home makeover. But is it not also quite convenient for your image? I mean, you get to be on television week after week, looking like an absolute hero, while getting paid quite handsomely for it, I might add. Is that not a bit, well, I am just going to say it, is that not a bit self-serving? Are you really doing this for the families, or are you doing it for yourself?" The studio went completely quiet. You could have heard a pin drop in that moment. The audience members looked at each other in confusion and shock. The other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances, their faces registering surprise at the direction this was taking. Nick's smile faded slightly, the warmth in his expression replaced by confusion and the beginnings of something else. But he maintained his composure as best he could. I am not sure I understand what you are suggesting here, Denise," Nick said carefully, choosing his words with obvious care. "The show does pay me. Yes, I am not going to deny that. But I also put in an enormous amount of my own time and my own money into these projects. I work with these families for months sometimes, not just during the 9-day build. And more importantly, much more importantly, the families get homes that genuinely change their lives in fundamental ways. That is what matters here. That is what this is all about. The families." Denise leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms across her chest in a defensive posture. "But you are building your brand on the backs of vulnerable people, are you not? You are using their suffering, their struggles, their pain to make yourself look good, to make yourself the hero of the story." Nick's jaw tightened visibly, the muscles in his face tensing. "Denise, these families come to us asking for help. They reach out to us because they have nowhere else to turn. We do not seek them out to exploit them. We do not go looking for sob stories. They are desperate, genuinely desperate, and we provide solutions that they could not possibly afford otherwise. I really do not think it is fair at all to suggest that I am using anyone. That is not what this is about." Kay Adams tried to intervene, her voice carrying a note of concern. I think what Nick does is absolutely wonderful. Can we perhaps talk about the actual projects themselves? You maybe hear more about the volunteers?" But Denise was not finished. She was just getting started. She turned to face Nick more directly, her body language aggressive, her voice growing sharper and more pointed. "And let us talk about your personal life for a moment, shall we? You have been in the tabloids quite a bit lately. Relationships, breakups, new girlfriends, all over the gossip pages. For someone who claims to be all about charity and helping others, is someone who wants to be seen as this selfless person, you seem to spend an awful lot of time in the gossip columns. Does that not undermine what you are trying to do here? Nick straightened in his chair, his composure starting to crack. My personal life has absolutely nothing to do with the work I do. Nothing whatsoever. I am here to talk about DIYSOS and the families we help and the incredible volunteers who make it possible. I did not come here to be interrogated about tabloid stories and gossip. That has nothing to do with why I am sitting in this chair. But it is relevant, though, is it not? Denise pressed on, her voice rising slightly, clearly not backing down. If you are going to present yourself as this saint who helps people, this wonderful charitable person, then your own behavior matters. Your own life matters. You cannot have it both ways, Nick. You cannot court the media when it suits you. When you want publicity for your show and then complain and play the victim when people ask questions about your life. Nadia tried to jump in, her voice carrying concern and an attempt at peacemaking. Denise, I really think we should focus on the charity work. That is genuinely why Nick is here today. That is what we invited him to talk about. Denise waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away Nadia's concern. No, I think this is actually very important. The public deserves to know who they are really dealing with here. Nick comes on here, tells us these lovely stories about helping families, shows us the tears and the emotion, and everyone is supposed to think he is absolutely wonderful. But what about the truth? What about the reality? What about the fact that he is just another celebrity using charity work to stay relevant, to keep his name in the papers, to keep his career going? Nick's face was now visibly flushed with anger, his neck reddening. He took a deep breath, clearly trying very hard to maintain his professionalism, trying to keep himself under control. Denise, I have to say, I find your attitude incredibly insulting, not just to me personally, but to the families I work with, to the volunteers who give their time. You are sitting here in your comfortable studio, in your comfortable chair, questioning the motives of people who give up their time, their money, their energy, their weekends, to help others who are struggling. Have you ever spent 9 days working around the clock, barely sleeping, to build a disabled child a proper bedroom? Have you ever held a mother while she cries because she finally has a home that works for her family? Have you done any of that? Denise did not back down. If anything, she doubled down, leaning forward slightly. I am asking legitimate questions that I think our audience wants answers to. You do not get to come on this show and expect everyone to just fawn over you and tell you how wonderful you are. That is not how this works. Legitimate questions? Nick repeated, his voice incredulous, almost laughing in disbelief. You are attacking my character, questioning my integrity, dismissing the real impact this work has on real people with real problems. That is not journalism, Denise. That is not asking tough questions. That is just being mean-spirited. And that is just being nasty for the sake of it. Jane Moore spoke up, her voice firm and clear, taking a side. Denise, I actually think you are being really unfair here. Nick's work speaks for itself. Thousands upon thousands of families have been helped over the years. Real families with real problems who have had their lives transformed. Denise turned to Jane with a look of annoyance, clearly not appreciating the pushback. Oh, so we are all just supposed to agree. Is that it? This is supposed to be a debate show, Jane. We are supposed to challenge our guests. We are supposed to ask difficult questions, not just sit here like nodding dogs agreeing with everything. There is a difference between challenging someone and being hostile, though, Kay said, her voice carrying a clear note of warning, her expression serious. There is a difference between asking tough questions and just attacking someone. But Denise was completely undeterred. She looked back at Nick, her gaze direct and unflinching. You know what I think? I think you enjoy being seen as the good guy. I think you absolutely love the attention, the praise, the awards, the recognition. And I think if there was no camera following you around, No television show documenting it all, no newspaper articles about how wonderful you are, you would not be helping anyone. You would not be doing any of this. That was the breaking point, the final straw. Nick stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, his microphone nearly falling off his jacket. The audience gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath. The other panelists looked absolutely shocked, their mouths hanging open. Nobody had expected this. You know what, Denise? I do not need to sit here and listen to this anymore, Nick said, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. I came here in good faith to talk about work that I am genuinely passionate about. Work that helps people who are struggling, people who have nowhere else to turn. And you have spent this entire interview, from the moment you opened your mouth, trying to tear me down for absolutely no reason other than, what? You need to create drama. You need to prove you are the tough interviewer who is not afraid to ask the hard questions. Is that what this is about? Denise remained seated, her arms still crossed defensively across her chest. If you cannot handle a few tough questions, maybe you should not be on television at all. Maybe you should find another line of work. Nick let out a bitter, hollow laugh. Tough questions? You think those were tough questions? You have not asked me a single question about the actual work we do. Not one. You have not asked about the families, the volunteers who give their time, the builders who work for free, the impact we have made in communities all across this country. All you have done is attack my character based on nothing but your own assumptions and tabloid gossip that you have read. That is not journalism. Nadia stood up quickly, reaching toward Nick with concern written all over her face. Nick, please, sit down. Let us try to move past this. Let us talk about the actual work. But Nick shook his head firmly, his decision made. No, Nadia, I genuinely appreciate your kindness. I really do. But I am not going to sit here and be insulted like this. I am not going to sit here while someone questions whether I actually care about the families I help. There are families out there right now, right this minute, who desperately need help. There are volunteers giving up their precious time. There are builders, electricians, plumbers, all working for absolutely free to make a real difference in people's lives. And Denise thinks that is all just some kind of publicity stunt? Some kind of career move? He turned to face the camera directly, speaking past the panel to address the viewers at home, his voice strong despite his obvious anger and frustration. To everyone watching at home right now, I want you to know that DIYSOS is absolutely real. The families are real people with real struggles. The transformations we create are real and lasting, and the hundreds of people who volunteer their time and their skills on every single build, they do it because they genuinely care, not because they want anything in return. They do not get paid. They do not get recognition. They just do it because it is the right thing to do. Then he looked back at Denise, his gaze steady and unwavering. As for you, Denise, I think it is really, really sad that you feel the need to tear down people who are genuinely trying to do good in the world. Maybe instead of sitting here in your comfortable chair, judging others and questioning their motives, you should try actually helping someone yourself. And you might learn something valuable about compassion and empathy. Denise's face flushed bright red, her composure finally cracking. How dare you sit there and lecture me about compassion? How dare you? You do not know a single thing about what I do, about my life, about anything. And you do not know anything about me. Nick shot back immediately, his voice rising to match hers. But that did not stop you from spending the last 10 minutes making wild accusations and passing judgments. Did it? That did not stop you at all. Kay stood up now too, her hands raised in a gesture of peace, trying desperately to regain control. Everyone, please, let us all just calm down and take a breath. This has gotten way out of hand. But the damage was already done. The line had been crossed. Nick unclipped his microphone carefully and placed it on his chair with deliberate precision. I am done here. I am absolutely done. Thank you to Kay, Nadia, and Jane for at least trying to have a civil conversation, for at least showing some basic respect. Denise, I genuinely hope you are happy with yourself and what you have achieved here today. Oh, do not be so dramatic about it, Denise said, rolling her eyes and waving her hand dismissively. You just cannot handle a little bit of criticism, can you? Nick stopped in his tracks and turned back one more time, his expression a mixture of anger and disappointment. Criticism? No, Denise. What you did here today was not criticism. It was an ambush, plain and simple. There is a fundamental difference between asking challenging questions and setting out from the beginning to humiliate someone, to tear them down. You clearly decided before I even walked in here, before I even sat down in this chair, that you were going to try to take me down. Well, congratulations. You have succeeded in making me angry. You have succeeded in ruining what should have been a positive conversation. But you have not succeeded in making me doubt the work I do or the people I help. You have not succeeded in that at all. With those final words hanging in the air, Nick walked off the set with his head held high. The cameras followed him as he made his way past the stunned crew members, past the producers who were frantically trying to figure out what to do next, and out through the heavy studio doors. The audience sat in complete stunned silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Even the other panelists seemed at a complete loss for words, staring at the space where Nick had been sitting just moments before. Denise sat back in her chair slowly, her arms still crossed defensively, but now there was a clear flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a crack in her confident facade. She looked at the other panelists as if expecting them to back her up, to support her position, but they would not meet her gaze. They all looked away, uncomfortable and unwilling to defend what had just happened. Kay turned to the camera, trying desperately to regain some control of the situation, her professional mask slipping back into place. Well, that was certainly unexpected. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. As the cameras cut away and the red lights went dark, the studio immediately erupted into absolute chaos. Producers rushed onto the set from all directions. The audience members were talking loudly amongst themselves, some clearly upset and disturbed by what they had just witnessed. Jane Moore leaned over to Denise, her expression serious and disappointed. That was completely out of line, Denise, Jane said quietly, but very firmly, her voice carrying clear disapproval. Completely and totally out of line. He came here to talk about charity work, about helping families, and you turned it into a personal attack. That was not okay. Denise looked defensive, her arms tightening across her chest. I was just asking the questions that needed to be asked. No, Nadia interjected firmly, her usual warmth and kindness completely replaced with clear disappointment. You were attacking him. You were being hostile from the start. There's a massive difference between challenging someone and what you just did. A stressed-looking producer approached the desk quickly, clutching a clipboard and looking frazzled. We need to decide right now what we are doing when we come back from the break. Do we address what just happened head on, or do we try to move on to the next topic and pretend it did not happen? Kay sighed deeply, rubbing her forehead. We absolutely have to address it. We cannot just pretend that did not happen. Everyone saw it. Everyone at home saw it. We have to say something. Back in his dressing room, Nick was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline still coursing through his system. His assistant knocked on the door gently and entered cautiously, unsure of what state she would find him in. Nick, are you okay? She asked softly, concern evident in her voice. He stopped pacing and looked at her, running his hand through his hair in frustration. I should not have lost my temper like that. I should have just sat there and taken it. You've been the bigger person. That is what I should have done. No, she said firmly, stepping closer to him. No, you stood up for yourself and for the work you do. What she said was completely unfair, and everyone watching knows it. Everyone. Nick ran his hand through his hair again, a gesture of frustration and exhaustion. I just wanted to talk about the families, about the work. That's all I wanted. I wanted people to know about the good work that is being done, eyes about the lives being changed. And instead, it turned into that nightmare. Meanwhile, back on the set, the show was about to return from the commercial break. Denise had been quietly conferring with a producer in hushed tones, but she still looked defensive and unwilling to back down. Kay, Jane, and Nadia had clearly formed a united front against her, standing together both literally and figuratively. When the cameras came back on and the red lights glowed, Kay addressed the audience directly with a serious expression. Welcome back, everyone. As you all saw before the break, our guest Nick Knowles left the show after a very heated exchange with Denise. I think we really need to talk about what happened there and address it directly. Jane jumped in immediately, not waiting for anyone else to speak. I have to say, I was very, very uncomfortable with how that entire interview went from start to finish. Nick came here specifically to talk about his incredible charity work, and it felt like he was being ambushed from the moment he sat down. Nadia nodded in strong agreement, her expression serious. I completely agree with Jane. I think the questions crossed a very clear line, from challenging to personal attacks. Nick does incredible, genuinely incredible work, helping families in desperate need. And he absolutely did not deserve to be treated that way. Denise shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly feeling the weight of being outnumbered. I was doing my job as an interviewer. I was asking the questions that I think people at home might be wondering about, the questions others are afraid to ask. But were you really? Kay challenged directly, her voice carrying an edge. Or were you just being confrontational and hostile for the sake of it? Because from where I was sitting, and I was right here next to you, it looked like you had made up your mind about Nick before he even sat down in that chair. It looked like you decided you were going to go after him, no matter what he said. Denise's voice rose defensively, her frustration showing. So I am not allowed to question people anymore? Is that what you are saying? I am just supposed to sit here and agree with everything, and never challenge anyone. There is questioning people, Jane said firmly, leaning forward. And then there is what you did today. You accused him directly of using vulnerable families for his own personal gain. You suggested his entire charity work was just about building his own brand and staying famous. Those were not questions, Denise. Those were accusations. Those were attacks on his character. The audience began to murmur louder now, many of them nodding in clear agreement with Jane's assessment. Denise looked around the studio, and perhaps finally realizing that she was completely outnumbered, that nobody was on her side. Nadia spoke up again, her voice still gentle but carrying unmistakable firmness. Denise, I know you like to be the one who says what everyone is supposedly thinking, but sometimes, and I think this is one of those times, what you think everyone is thinking is really just what you are thinking. And today, I genuinely think you got it completely wrong. Denise opened her mouth to respond, being ready to defend herself again, but Kay cut her off before she could speak. I think we really need to move on to our next segment now. But I do want to say this clearly, on behalf of the show and everyone here, that we genuinely appreciate all the amazing work Nick Knowles does, and we are truly sorry that today's interview did not go as it should have. We are sorry it ended that way. As the show continued through the remaining segments, Denise remained notably quiet, barely speaking at all. The usual dynamic energy of the panel was completely gone, replaced by an awkward, uncomfortable tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. Every so often, the camera would catch Denise looking uncomfortable and uncertain, her earlier confidence clearly shaken to its core. When the show finally wrapped up for the day, the final segment having been rushed through awkwardly, the usual friendly banter between the panelists was completely absent. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, when Jane immediately stood up and walked off the set without saying a single word to Denise, not even looking in her direction. Nadia followed shortly after, gathering her notes and water bottle, but she paused at the edge of the set and turned back to face Denise directly. You know, Denise, sometimes being the tough one, the one who is not afraid to ask the hard questions, just makes you the mean one. You should really think about that. Really think about it. Kay was the last to leave the desk. She looked at Denise for a long, meaningful moment before speaking, her expression serious and disappointed. We are going to have a serious conversation about this, about what happened today. What happened here today, it absolutely cannot happen again. Ever. Denise sat alone at the desk in the now quiet studio, the bright lights still glowing above her, but the space around her empty and silent. She had thought she was doing her job, fulfilling her role as the provocative one. She had thought she was pushing back against someone she saw as using charity work for personal gain and publicity. But as she sat there in the heavy silence, surrounded by abandoned coffee cups and crumpled scripts and the debris of the show, she could not shake the growing feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had gone way too far this time. What had started as what she thought would be a challenging interview had turned into something else entirely. It had become a confrontation that everyone would remember, and not in the way she had hoped. The look on Nick's face when he stood up to leave, the way the other panelists had turned against her, the disappointment in Kay's eyes, the audience's reaction, all of it played back in her mind on an endless loop.